Are we live?
Yep.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. I want to start off by thanking Shravan for helping us set up the technical portion of this presentation. And thank you for all attending. Today we are hosting the first Accessibility Services Registration Seminar, which is basically a tutorial on how to navigate accessibility services, how to manage your accommodations once you get them, and all sorts of advice that myself and another student who is here, who has been through accessibility services, can give to smooth the process over. So let's get started. So what is accessibility services? It's basically a university-run service that provides students with academic accommodations to help them if they suffer from medical disabilities. Accessibility services accommodate students suffering from permanent physical and mental disabilities. But unfortunately, accessibility services cannot accommodate students only because of personal circumstances, such as family, relationship troubles, death in the family, or financial troubles. You have to go to your registrar to get a letter explaining your personal circumstances. In that case, so accessibility services is only if you suffer from a medical disability that prevents you from performing to the fullest extent, and if you have valid documentation. So we'll get to what that is in a minute. So basically, accessibility services can only accommodate students who have a documented medical disability, and we just want to clarify that if you have a personal problem that requires accommodation, you should talk to your registrar instead. So with that in mind, what can accessibility services do for you? Basically, accommodations depend on your need, and they're tailored to fit your own profile. So what that means is it really depends on what you suffer from. For example, people who have a temporary physical illness will probably have very different accommodations from somebody who suffers from a permanent mental disability. But generally speaking, the most common accommodations for students with these types of disabilities include extra time on exams and tests. And you will write these tests in accommodated testing services, which we'll get to in a minute. There are also assignment deadline extensions for people who cannot complete their homework or assignments on time. And if you're unable to attend lecture, there is also access to lecture recordings and notes from peer note takers. So that means that you will have access to notes from students also in the class who upload their notes to a service called Clockwork, which we'll also get to in a minute. Accessibility services will represent you with a student advisor who will renew your accommodations annually, who will speak to course administrators in case you have a problem that needs to be mediated. If they refuse to accommodate you, for example, which tends to happen sometimes when professors are not fully aware of your accommodations. So that's your advisor, and they will provide support and supporting letters to the university in the event that you need to make a petition. So in summary, accessibility services can provide help for you in the event that your university education is obstructed by your disability. Oftentimes when students have a disability and are not accommodated, professors will ask for some kind of verification of illness or note from your doctor, and this will always substitute the need for that. So this is essentially a university validation that you have a disability and that you have the right to accommodations. So when you write a test, as I mentioned, you will be writing it in this facility, which is called Accommodated Testing Services. They are also responsible for registering exams that you have. If you're accommodated by accessibility services, you will be writing your tests and exams in this room. But you have to register your evaluation on accommodated testing services on Acorn with at least 2 weeks notice, or by the final exam deadline. So essentially, when the final exam season happens, there is a deadline that you must register your final exam by, no matter whether your exam is at the end of the season or the beginning. So that is something to be aware of. But for all tests, you need to give at least 2 weeks notice. So generally it's recommended that once you get your syllabus, you register your exams as soon as possible. But in the event that your professor does not give you 2 weeks notice of a test, then you have to fill out another form, and you would contact your advisor in that case. The benefits of accommodated testing services are pretty significant, especially if you have extra time. Other than that, as you can see here, you have access to private cubicles, which are designed to remove as many distractions from your environment as possible. You have access to soundproof rooms like this one, which again are explicitly for students who require minimal distractions. And in the event that your accommodations include break time, you can notify your invigilator whenever you wish to take a break from your exam, and you will usually spend that time in this area or another area like it. There are several break rooms in ATS that you can take a break in. You can also go to the kitchen for complimentary water, coffee, and snacks during your break time, during your exam. And the last thing I wanted to mention is that when you enter, so ATS is in the exam hall. All of your exams will be written here. You enter this EX340, or also EX300 is also used by accessibility services. And you enter the room. You have to give your T card to the invigilator. There's a central office behind the doors here. And once you do that, you put all of your baggage and unauthorized aids in the locker. And then you enter the office. They prepare your documentation, verifying that you are an exam taker with ATS, and then you will begin your exam. So that's ATS. Excuse me. So I've spoken a lot about the benefits of accessibility services, but I think that the main point of this presentation should be to make sure students understand how they register with accessibility services, because as many people know, and I certainly have been through this experience, it's rather difficult and sometimes a bit convoluted how to register with accessibility services. So the point of this presentation is really just to summarize in as brief terms as possible how do you register with AES. So part of the reason why we are hosting this presentation now in the summer is because that registration for the accessibility services for the full year, in other words for accommodations starting as soon as the academic year begins in the fall, you must submit your registration by July 14th at 5 p.m. In Toronto time. And there are minimal exceptions for this rule. You can definitely submit your application profile after this deadline, but it's not guaranteed that you'll have accommodations starting in the fall. In other words, you may not be accommodated for your midterm exams, or you may not have accommodations for your homework assignments for the fall semester. So it is definitely recommended that you start registration as soon as possible. And if you do miss the deadline, obviously it takes a while to get the documentation signed by your doctor. You can still register by October 6th at 5 p.m. Toronto time for accommodations for the final exam period for the fall semester. So it is very much recommended, I can't stress this enough, that you have to start registering as soon as possible. Do not wait. Contact your doctor immediately and we will tell you what to do. It's a 3-step process, registration. So the first step, and this is the hardest step, I think it's the most tedious because we all know how doctors and we all have different sort of situations with medical accommodations. It's definitely the most difficult step, obtaining your documentation. For all cases of accessibility services, usually the only document you need actually is the certificate of disability, but there are a few exceptions and we'll get to that in a minute. So the certificate of disability is a accessibility services document. It's a 10-page document that basically your doctor must fill out, verifying what kind of disability you have and how it affects your education. I'll go over the specifics of the document in the coming few slides, but the next step, once you've obtained and gotten your doctor to sign the certificate of disability, you must complete the intake form. And now the intake form can be completed online in a single setting, but it is also available offline if you have no access to the internet. And the intake form is where you attach your certificate of disability to submit to accessibility services. And once you've submitted the intake form, basically your registration is done. So you must do steps 1 and 2 by July 14th in order for your accommodations to start in the year. So once you've done that, the next step, the final step, is you have to attend your registration appointment. You will be emailed by accessibility services on where to go, and you will meet with your advisor. You guys will discuss what kind of accommodations you need, and that will be when your accommodations are officiated. You will, after the appointment, get a letter of accommodation for all of your courses that you'll be able to access on the accessibility services online portal called Clockwork. And all of that information will be sent to you in an email once you finish your registration appointment. So why don't we start with the first step in more detail. And that is you must obtain your documentation to prove to accessibility services, not only to prove to accessibility services that you need accommodations, but to outline what kind of accommodations you need. So as I said, it's definitely the most tedious and time-consuming part of registration with accessibility services. So I would recommend that you do it first. You can actually submit the intake form first, but they're still going to ask you for the documentation. So I really don't see a point in doing the intake form first. You may as well just obtain the documentation and then submit it with the intake form. So now in most cases, the only document you need is the certificate of disability. All you need to go to the accessibility services website, and you will find the certificate of disability, or you can just look up accessibility services certificate of disability, and it should be available as a PDF as one of the first search results. But once you have a certificate of disability, then you need to have that. You need to book an appointment with your doctor or any licensed healthcare practitioner who is familiar with your case, with your disability. Once you have an appointment with that person, they will sit down with you and sign it. They will fill the form out, and we'll get to the specifics of the form in a minute. Now, so in most cases, this is the only document you need. But there are a few exceptions, and those exceptions include if you're a person who has a physical injury, you are allowed to submit an emergency room report of your injury and how it affects your education, how it affects your neurology, in order to gain accommodations instead of a certificate of disability. So in other words, if you have a physical disability, an ER report is actually sufficient alone. You don't need to fill out a certificate of disability in this case, but that's only if you have had a severe physical injury and your emergency room physician or neurologist has specified the effects it'll have on your mental condition. Another example that is notable on the Accessibility Services website is that if you have a learning disability, then in addition to the certificate of disability, it is recommended, and in some cases actually mandatory, that you submit a psychoeducational assessment report, which specifies the extent of your learning disability. And this can give you access to even more extreme accommodations, such as up to twice as much writing time. But that's for students with learning disability. So this sort of goes back to the point of earlier, as I mentioned, the range of accommodations that accessibility services can give you is actually quite significant. And generally speaking, the more documentation that you have to submit about your condition, the better. It's pretty important to mention that because of matters relating to medical privacy, if you suffer from a mental disability and you're seeking accommodation on those grounds, you actually don't need to specify that diagnosis, but that is a decision that you can make with your practitioner. Generally speaking, though, if you want better accommodations, to be as specific as possible about your condition is generally the better way to go, but ultimately that decision's up to you. So one of the options on the Accessibility Services registration document, the Certificate of Disability, is a section that sort of generalizes all mental disorders in the event that you don't want to disclose that. So to summarize this portion, for most cases, all you need is the Certificate of Disability to be filled out by your doctor. And that is a 10-page document that we will explore in a minute. But first of all, I wanted to get to the point of something that is pretty serious. And something that I've heard a lot from students is they are unfortunately unable to complete the step because they don't have access to a medical professional. So if you don't have a doctor who is licensed to sign your document and to validate your condition, then you still have a few options. And the most notable is that all students at U of T have eligibility to seek an appointment from Health and Wellness, which is part of student life, and automatically part of your tuition actually goes to register you with this service, unless you have specifically opted out of it. So if you really have no access to any healthcare in Ontario or anywhere else, if you have no access to any licensed healthcare practitioner who can validate your certificate of disability, then I recommend that if you have not opted out of Health and Wellness, to call them at this number. And the reception staff on the phone will guide you through the process of whether you need an appointment for mental disability or a physical disability. Once you've finished speaking with the reception staff, then you have to complete the online registration package with Health and Wellness. And once you submit the package, I've never actually completed the registration package. I'm not with Health and Wellness, but I'm pretty sure that they have an online portal called Media or something like that. But regardless, you can just go to their website and they will have very specific steps on how to register with Health and Wellness. Once you've submitted the online registration package, you can call them again at the same number, and that's when you'll schedule your intake appointment. Now, once you're at your intake appointment, you will speak with the medical professional that they assign to you, and you can bring them the certificate of disability. Perhaps after the intake appointment, once they're more familiar with your condition, they will fill it out, and you will have your documentation that you need. Now, as to the certificate of disability, it is a 10-page document that you really only need to fill out one page. The rest needs to be done by your doctor. So this is the page that you need to fill out. All you need to do is put your name, your student number that appears on your T-card, your email, your phone number, your date of birth, and then you need to specify the specifics of your program, like if you will be completing lab, field work, or practical work as part of your program. And the last thing that you need to do on this form is to authorize your healthcare professional to disclose information about your condition to accessibility services. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you can choose whether or not to disclose your mental health diagnosis to the University of Toronto by either, if you consent, you check this first box, if you don't consent, you check the second box. That's all you need to complete. The rest is done by your doctor. Now, your doctor will, so this is the second page, your doctor will have to fill out the rest of the form. So, depending on whether you go to your family doctor, your psychiatrist, your neurologist, whatever the case may be, they will fill out their specialty. And now this is a pretty important part because you can't just go to any healthcare professional. You have to go to somebody who's familiar with your disability. So, you know, if you, for example, if you suffer from ADHD and you need accommodations for that, accessibility services would give your application more consideration if you went to speak with a psychiatrist or a family doctor who knew your condition well, than if you went to a optometrist or ophthalmologist. Like, you need to sort of speak with somebody who knows your disability well, who has the credentials to deal with it. And so that's pretty important. In fact, accessibility services explicitly states that they prefer applications who are validated by a doctor in the specialty that is relevant to your condition. So yeah, if you have a physical disability, you would probably have verification from an emergency room doctor or perhaps a physical therapist. But whatever the case may be, you need to speak with a healthcare professional who's sort of licensed to deal with your case, and somebody who is familiar with you and your disability. To that end, as I mentioned before, health and wellness. If you go speak to health and wellness to get your validation, then you probably will need to attend a few appointments before they will be able to fill out this form, because they need to become familiar with your case. But regardless, let's move on to the next page. Now, this is a form where the doctor will specify what kind of the nature of your disability. Now, in the event that so suppose that you have a mental disability and you want to get accommodations for that. If you want to disclose your mental disability, then there is options for that. As you can see, if you have ADHD, if you have autism, that could be disclosed. For other mental disabilities, they all sort of fall into this category. And if you chose to disclose the mental diagnosis, then that will be specified in a later page. But otherwise, this is really the only thing that they will see. If you don't want to disclose your mental disability, then they will check that you have they'll check this category, and they will only speak about how the disability affects your performance in an academic environment. They will not disclose to the university your diagnosis. So I think that's pretty important to point out. Otherwise, if you suffer from a physical illness, there are options for that. For example, if you suffer from chronic pain, or a physical mobility issue due to a temporary injury, then there are options for that as well. And if you have something that does not fall into any of these categories, there is also an option for that. So that is pretty important. Yes, so here, as I said before, the doctor will provide more details about your disability. If you have given the doctor permission to disclose your mental health diagnosis to the university, they will speak more about it here. For example, if you have depression, that would fall under the mental health category. And if you want to disclose that, then they will speak about it here. If you have anxiety, same thing. They will speak about your diagnosis here. They will give the university details about your diagnosis and your condition. But if you don't want to give consent to disclosing your mental disability to the university, then they will not disclose the diagnosis. They will only specify that you're seeking accommodations on the grounds of mental illness. So the next portion of this page speaks about the duration of your illness. And accommodations fall into one of two categories. Accommodations for permanent disability, such as most mental conditions, will fall into this category. If you have a disability that is expected to remain with you for the remainder of your life, then you will have accommodations for a permanent disability. A prolonged disability is one that is expected to last about at least 12 months, but with a duration that is not permanent. So if you have a severe physical injury, then in some cases this will be the category. This will be the category of your accommodations, and this is relevant because the duration of your accommodations specifies how many academic years you are entitled to receive these accommodations. So in my case, I happen to have a permanent disability that accessibility services every year at the end of the academic year gives me an automatic link to renew them. So that will be different if you have a prolonged disability, because then you'll have to meet with your advisor at the end of the academic year and have to renew your accommodations. And that the same goes if you have a temporary disability, which is a disability that has an anticipated duration of prognosis of less than 12 months. And in this, most mild physical injuries will fall into this category. If you suffer from a concussion, a brain injury, or a physical injury, you'll probably fall into the bottom of these two categories. If you have a mental health disability, in most cases, this will be a permanent disability, but your doctor will make that determination. I'm just speaking about how this will probably affect your accommodations, because I am in no way qualified to assess what kind of mental or physical disabilities will fall into these categories. And the final section is the one where your doctor will probably need your feedback, but they need to fill it out. So this is the reason why you can't really just go into your doctor's office and drop the form off and have them complete it on their own. You kind of have to sit down with them and give them advice or feedback on how you think the disability in question affects you. So this is an example, but there are many categories like this where the form asks you to rate the severity of how your disability affects your physical and cognitive abilities. Now in this case, I have specified the cognitive section because I think this is a pretty good example of how accessibility services sort students by sort of severity of their disability to give them accommodations. So as you can see, there are different sort of criteria for cognitive disability. They will ask you how much your concentration is affected, for example, by your disability. And someone who has a mild difficulty with concentration will probably receive less time, less extra time on exams than someone who has a serious difficulty with concentration. Similarly, someone who has difficulty with organization or time management will probably receive more time on their exams if they have a more serious problem with it. And they'll have more options for they'll have more options for extensions on their assignments. And you can, from that criteria, you can sort of work out with your doctor how your disability affects you. There's other categories like low motivation, executive functioning, difficulty with completing tasks, judgment, insight. And there are many such categories that explore the effect of your disability that sort of quantifies or qualifies, I suppose, in a very sort of as objective as possible to accessibility services, how your disability affects you. So your doctor will fill this out, but with the consent and sort of advice of yourself. And there are similar categories for physical illness, such as the quality of your eyesight, your hearing. There are other profiles like how, if you're able to socialize with people, if that is affected. And the form contains all this information. So that's the certificate of disability. It's a 10-page document. You need to have it signed by your doctor, filled out by your doctor. You only need to personally fill out only one page. The rest of the 9 pages is filled out by your doctor. It's a PDF. You can print it, take it to your doctor, get it filled out, and you'll be done with that. That's the most difficult part of registration, in my opinion, from my experience. Once you're done with that, then basically it's smooth sailing as far as getting your accommodation goes, because the student intake form is the next step, and in my opinion, the easiest step before you register. So the student intake form, you can do it online. You will have to attach all of your documentation to the student intake form. But all you really need to do, and it can be completed in a single sitting, all you need to do is sort of, they ask you questions about the history of your disability. They will ask you to rate your strengths and your weaknesses in respect to your disability. They will ask you to rate and to speak about your coping mechanisms. They will ask you about your history in high school and your previous academic experiences, how your disability has affected you. For example, if you struggle more with sort of time management than organization, they will ask you to sort of put yourself on a spectrum, so to speak. It can also be completed online. If you email the accessibility services, they will send you the latest PDF that you can complete offline in case, say, maybe you don't have access to the online intake forum because, like me, you tried filling it out once, you submitted it, and your application was rejected because you didn't attach the certificate of disability. So in that case, you need to, they actually don't let you fill it out more than once. In that case, you need to email accessibility services when you do have your documentation, and they'll send you the offline form. And then they'll give you a portal where to upload all the documents. So that's the intake form. It's the easiest part of registration, in my opinion. It doesn't take more than it takes 30 minutes to fill it out, and once you have the documentation, you submit the form, you're done. So if you do this by July 14th at 5 p.m., then provided that your accommodation, that the accessibility services accept your application or a registration form, then you will have your accommodations for the beginning of the year in September. But in order to get those accommodations, you need to attend your intake appointment, and they will email. So within a month of registering for accessibility services, they are going to contact you by email or phone. They're going to arrange an appointment between you and your accessibility advisor, either in person or online on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever. And the advisor will sit down with you. They might ask you some questions about your application to speak about more detail of how your disability affects you. They will sort of ask you what accommodations you think you need, and in their judgment, they'll officiate your accommodations based on the nature of your disability. After the appointment, the advisor is going to email you with a summary of the meeting. They're going to email you with the accommodations that you have been granted. They're going to email you with a link to, as I mentioned, this is called Clockwork. It's basically the Accessibility Services online portal where you can download all of the letter of accommodations for your courses, and those are automatically generated as soon as you register with the course. The letter specifies your accommodations, and it's basically proof. It's essentially, it replaces the verification of illness form and the need to get a note from your doctor, whatever you need an accommodation, because if you attach that to an email to your professor, they're obliged to grant you accommodations in that case. So, yes, Clockwork contains your letters of accommodation. It also contains a portal where you can upload documents in case you need to provide, or in case you maybe need to change your accommodations based on new information from your doctor. And Clockwork will allow you to do that. Also, it has, if you have been granted peer notes, some accommodations allow you to get access to notes from your peers who upload them to Clockwork. Then you can actually take a look at those in the event that maybe your disability prevents you from attending class. And so that is also an option. So that's your intake appointment. So those are the 3 steps. And then once you're done with those 3 steps, then you're in, because that's all that there is to registration. So I'm going to speak now about the experience you have in managing your accommodations. So once you have your accommodations, whenever you need to be accommodated in a class, it is your responsibility to contact your course admin or your lecturer or whoever you're sort of reporting to for the class. And you need to make them aware of your need and request, depending on the case. For example, if you have a homework assignment that you're unable to complete on time, then you're responsible. You still need to sort of contact them by the due date. You need to follow the rules of the class in requesting an extension. But the main difference is that you don't need to get a verification of illness. You don't need a note from your doctor. All you need to do is attach your letter of accommodation to the email, and that is the university's validation for your illness in this case. And these requests for extensions or accommodations in any regard are usually done by email, because that is the most sort of convenient way of attaching and showing your letter of accommodation. As long as your request is consistent with your accommodations, so you're making a request that falls within the purview of your accommodations, then your course instructor is obliged, they have to grant your request without the need to sort of elaborate on why you need your accommodations. As long as you say, I'm a student with accessibility services accommodations, and I would like your accommodation, they will grant it. They have to. Otherwise, if they don't, then you can contact your accessibility services advisor, who will speak with the course admin on your behalf, and they will reach an agreement if that's the case. As I said, you have to communicate with your accessibility advisor if you need to mediate an agreement between yourself and the instructor in the event that you need an accommodation that actually falls outside of the scope of your accommodation. For example, if your accommodation specifies that you have a week extension and you need 2 weeks, that's something that you need to work out with your advisor on a case-by-case basis, who will communicate with the instructor on your behalf. Another important thing about managing your accommodations, well, we'll get to that in a minute, but I wanted to use an example of my own sort of case. This is an example of how to get like an extension if you have accessibility services. This is an example from a class of mine where homework assignment was due, and because of my disability, there was some trouble. I couldn't complete the assignment on time. So in this email, I contacted the professor saying I cannot complete the problem set by the due date, which was 11 p.m. that night. And I asked for 2 days, an extension of 2 days to complete and submit the assignment. As you can tell, I mean, I didn't specify why I needed the extension other than, you know, I have a permanent disability. Accessibility Services allows me to have these accommodations, and I specified that I only needed 2 days. My accommodations allow me to have up to a week of accommodations, and the professor replied that he granted the extension, and he says, you know, up to a week, any future requests will be granted. So that's one of the biggest benefits, in my opinion, of accommodations is if you have a problem that is related to your accommodation, if you have a problem that's related to your disability, some students, you know, naturally are not comfortable with sharing that with the professor. If you have problems, you can maintain anonymity with accessibility services. So, and it is also it's very expedient too, because sometimes if you want an extension and you don't have accessibility services, the professors might ask you for a verification of illness form, and you need to go to get your family doctor or medical professional to sign off on that. And getting, you know, appointments can take a week or two, and it's very inconvenient. But if you have accommodations with accessibility services, it's very fast. So yeah, I wanted to speak about renewing your accommodations, because this is something that a lot of students who have recently gotten accessibility services struggle with, including me. I mean, some students don't know that you have to renew your accommodations at the end of every academic year. And this is especially important if you take summer courses. Because if you take summer courses and you don't have your accommodations renewed, then you may not be able to write your final exam with your accommodations. You may not be able to write your midterm in the summer course with your accommodations. And that is not a good thing. So in cases where if you have a permanent disability, they automatically email you, sending you this link, where if you renew your accommodation, if you click this link, you can confirm if you want to renew your accommodations. And that's all you need to do. Then it's renewed within 2 to 3 business days, and if you're taking summer courses, then you'll have your accommodations. But in the case that you want to make changes to your accommodations, then you need to sort of speak with your advisor, and you'll probably need to upload documents from your doctor specifying why you want to change your accommodations, whatever the case may be. If you have a temporary or prolonged disability, then you probably will not be able to renew your accommodations automatically. You will need to speak with your advisor, and you guys will make the judgment on your own whether or not you need accommodations going forward. And if you do need accommodations from that point onwards, then that is something that you will have to deal with your advisor with. So to exemplify all of this, because I'm sure that it's probably getting a bit overwhelming with all these hypotheticals and these sort of rules and regulations, I think it's just easier to finish off the presentation speaking about my own experience with accessibility services. So when I began U of T, I came here in September of 2023. That's when I started my first year. I didn't even know accessibility services existed. And I suffered from some permanent disabilities that definitely affected my performance in first year. I ran into academic problems in the first year, and I was unaccommodated. So whenever I needed an accommodation, I would have to go see my family doctor almost every 2 weeks to get a verification of illness form signed. And it was a very painstaking process. It was tedious, having to see my doctor every so often. It was expensive. It was a problem. And I learned that accessibility services existed. I wanted to register, but I couldn't because of how busy I was with the open courses. And generally speaking, I don't think it's very realistic to sign up with accessibility services during the year because of how busy you are. It's possible, but I would definitely emphasize the importance of registering during the summer now, like register immediately before your courses begin. So first year was difficult for many reasons, one of which was the fact that I did not have my accommodations. But after the first year concluded, I was able to start getting the work done to get my registration during the summer when there were no classes, and that was when it was the easiest. So I got my accommodations last summer, the summer before I began second year, and second year with my accommodations went very smoothly. Every time I had a problem, I would just, as I showed, I would just contact my professor with my letter of accommodation, and that's it. I would have my accommodations, they would have my extension, I would have my whatever. I would rate my tests in ATS, and the difference between first year tests and second year tests was massive. Like in first year, I had a lot of problems writing my linear algebra exam because the guy next to me was sniffling and coughing, and it was very distracting. And since I have some mild issues with concentration, that was a real problem. But the difference is that in ATS, I had my own room. There were absolutely no distractions. I was able to focus more on my tests, and it was very beautiful. It was a wonderful thing, and I cannot emphasize how much it helped me with my studies. So I went from in first year, constantly worrying about meeting deadlines and worrying about how much time I had left to complete assignments to worrying about, in second year, just my studies, which is where I think most people should be if they're in university. So if I could talk to myself in first year, I would say register for accessibility services during the summer. Do not wait. Do not hold off. It is very important that you do this for your academic success as soon as possible. Now, I'm going to invite another student who has a lot more experience with accessibility services than I do. He probably has a lot more advice to give, and I think it's very important that you listen to this person. Andrew Lehman will be coming up to speak about his experiences with accessibility services. As you can see, it's a lot more than I have. So I invite Andrew to come up to Andrew.
You've already. I don't think it's necessarily useful for me at this moment in time, because I feel like for me to really add more to this conversation, because I'm really a very good job of just going through the general processes that we need to do. In my case, it was a bit similar to him as to getting accommodations. I ended up having to wait until just late fall to the beginning of the winter term to get my full set of accommodations. So I had to defer some exams and assessments and stuff like that. So it's very important for students to immediately register with accessibility services. It's also important to be extremely organized and very diligent when dealing with your accessibility advisor. They're there to help, or they at least try to help you. But the problem is that accessibility services is generally very underfunded, and we don't have enough staff to keep up with all the students. So it's important that we hammer home on I need this to be done, and make sure you have this all well documented, because in case if they're not there on time and things get behind, you'll be able to send a petition with all that happened and where the lag in lead time was just a little off, so you're not actually able to meet an academic application. I think that Daniel did quite well for mentioning all the things that I was considering on mentioning. And also, I guess with one of the things I experienced that I think it's somewhat unique in my case, from what I've heard, but for my accommodations in high school, some of them weren't fully applied because my advisor necessarily didn't think it was necessary, despite the recommendations of my of the medical professional who diagnosed me. So I had to go through a couple of months long process to go ahead and convince my advisor, who does not have a medical degree or anything like that, to accept my diagnosis and the recommendations from the medical professional. So it's just important to be vigilant, and it's a very unfortunate that this is the case. And also, like, don't be discouraged. Make sure you talk with people at PhySU, because I'm sure like there's other people who have had experiences like this, and I'll be able to help. And I bet like many of the other people within PhySU are able to help them. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thanks. Thank you, Andrew. So yeah, as Andrew mentioned, I think that's a really good point, is that a lot of students in PhySU have accessibility services accommodation. Andrew, me, for those who don't know, I'm a current executive officer for Physics Student Union. I'm the treasurer of PhySU for the 2025 to 2026 year. I'm almost always in the lounge if I'm not in class. And I just welcome anyone who has any questions about accessibility services or concerns to please feel very free to approach me in the physical, in person if you're in the lounge, or shoot me a DM on Discord, or if you have any, if you recognize me on the street, you can always sort of ask me questions about accessibility services if you want. Yeah, so I think that I hope this presentation has sort of provide some clarity about this process, which I think could definitely use a lot more clarification. I definitely could have used this presentation when I was signing up the first time. So I hope that if there's somebody who is sort of confused about the process, that this presentation has proved helpful. Again, I welcome you to ask me any questions, or if you have any concerns about accessibility services, please contact me, and I am very happy to help. So I think that is pretty much it. Yep, that's it for the presentation, and I hope this has proved informative. So thank you for listening, and I think that's it. Yeah. If you want to contact PhySU, these are our details, and that's about it. Thank you very much for listening, and have a good afternoon.